Maverick News. The world is watching. In a universe full of ideas, we draw lightness from the dark to a place where opposites attract. Right meets left, positive touches negative, sparking an explosion of truth. Because politics makes strange bedfellows.
Man, a lot has happened. A lot can happen in 3 months since the last time we talked. You were on episode 15, and that was about a week before the October 7th attacks. So with so much to cover, let's get right into it. I did, at the top of the show, before we dive into the Middle East, I did want to acknowledge the death of Gonzalo Lira. It's now been confirmed that he did die in a Ukrainian prison where he's been since early August. And man, Caleb, it's just unbelievable that even today the State Department had no comment.
Yes, he was a U.S. citizen.
Right.
This was a U.S. citizen. He did not engage in any armed activities against the Ukrainian government. He was simply going around doing journalism. And he was allowed to rot in prison and die by the Biden White House. At that point, that's our government basically giving a license to the Ukrainian government to kill American citizens for their political views. And that's pretty blatantly horrifying, if you think about it, right? I mean, it's one thing for the USA to be aligned with Ukraine, but to say that Ukraine can then kill American citizens, they could have arranged for him to be deported back to the United States, never go back to Ukraine. They could have done, but they just ignored it, and then he died. I'm one of many American citizens that are on the Ukrainian government's list of information terrorists.
That's right. You are on the list.
Right. And if I were to go over to Ukraine and the Ukrainian authorities decided to kill me, Joe Biden is basically saying he would be okay with that.
Scary, isn't it? Because you're a journalist, too. And you work for a Russian television network, so they want you. And you frequently do travel back and forth to Russia. You were just over there not long ago.
Yes.
November. It must be a strange feeling to realize that they could nab you like they did Gonzalo. They could make you disappear, and that your own government probably wouldn't be there to help you.
Well, and it shows pretty blatant hypocrisy on their part, right? I mean, it's pretty clear right now that they've given the Ukrainian forces a license to kill. I knew a woman, Dari Dugina, the daughter of Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin. I met Alexander Dugin once in my life, which, social media will never let people forget that because I went to a conference and spoke with him. But his daughter, who was only 26 years old at the time of her death, she met with me 5 or 6 times, I would say. Most of the times when I would go over to Russia, we would have dinner, we would talk things over. I first met her at the World Youth Festival in 2017. And August 19th of last year, she was destroyed by a car bomb. Murdered.
It was right after they arrested Gonzalo,
like
within a week or two of that.
And she was in Russia. She wasn't in Ukraine. She was in Russia. And
that's right.
Her car was blown up and she was killed. And this is a 26-year-old young woman who was not a combatant, was not involved in any military operations. She had a radio show in Russia. She'd written a few books. She, did a lot to promote her father's work as a philosopher who was very supportive of Putin, and she was murdered. So, and there's been other murders that have gone on.
Yes.
So it's something to keep in mind. The other thing that I think is interesting about all of this is it appears that in some of these cases, these murderers in Russia, these people that they recruit in Russia to go kill people on behalf of the Ukrainian intelligence services, they get recruited through Facebook and through Twitter. Somebody kind of becomes their best friend on Twitter and Facebook and gradually gets compromising information on them through which they can blackmail them, gradually manipulate. And that seems to be the tactic that the intelligence agencies are using with apps like Discord and such, as they buddy with people, they get inside their heads, they manipulate them, and they get them to the point that they do things that, and in some cases, they don't even know what they're doing. There was one of these assassinations where, from what I understand, this young woman thought she was doing something to help this man who was assassinated. She went and brought him this statue. She didn't know it was a bomb, and it blew him up, right? And somebody on Facebook or Twitter or one of these apps had gotten to be her best friend online and done a lot of nice stuff for her and said, now, can't you go just take this statue and one thing led to another, and she ended up being the one who delivered the bomb that murdered this Russian journalist, right? And so that's something to watch out for. Social media is very dangerous, right? We know from the Twitter files how much it is manipulated and such. And, you should always be careful who you're talking to online, because you never really know if they are who they say they are or what their intentions are.
Speaking of social media, that was how I knew Gonzalo Lira. That was our only contact that we ever had with one another, was on Twitter. We had exchanged some private messages earlier this year. And just today, when I found out he was gone, I went back to my DM box and I looked at my last communication from him. And I think I'll keep it private. I'll keep it to myself, what was said. But I will say that he knew what was going to happen. And I wanted to ask you a quick question about that. When he was on the run and trying to cross the border and get out of Ukraine late last July, I was thinking to myself, and now I'm kicking myself that I didn't send him a private message to tell him what I was thinking. And I was thinking, Gonzalo, why don't you run to Russia? Do you think he would have been safe in Russia? Do you think he'd be alive today had he gone to Russia?
I must be honest with you. I don't know very much about Gonzalo Lira. I did not follow his work, extremely closely, and so I appreciate anyone who's telling the truth about Ukraine and telling the truth about, what was going on there and giving the other side of the story, exposing the atrocities of the Ukrainian government. But I wasn't deeply familiar with him and what he had to say. I know there's a lot of Russians that watched his content, were big fans of his work, so I can't imagine that the Russian government would have had an issue with him. But I don't know the details, and again, it's not something that I have studied with enough depth to comment on it. I do know that we at RT have covered his death quite a bit. And
saw your report today, or not your report, but RT's report. It was quite good.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
And
anyway,
one
rest
thing
in
bothers
peace,
me
Gonzalo.
also, I will say, is that, even now, the man's dead at this point, right? But, I continue to get people that bring up things he said about Chilean politics in the 1970s and all of that. It's like, you do realize this man's dead, right? Like, this is not, like, none of that matters right now, right?
That's not the point. The point is an American citizen, a journalist, was imprisoned and died due to lack of medical care, is what it sounds like. He had double pneumonia in his lungs, and he was not being given medication. I don't know if he had a bad case of COVID or if he just got pneumonia, but that was apparently the cause of death.
Yeah, and it's beyond me. Social media is so good at, digging up everyone's got something scandalous or controversial they've done or said, and that becomes the issue. And it's like, you do realize this American citizen was just allowed to die in a Ukrainian prison for not doing
the point,
other than spreading his political views on social media. So,
and I often disagreed with Gonzalo frequently. I certainly did not endorse everything that he said, but again, that's not the point. The point is the United States government was not there for him, and he was one of our citizens, and they let the Ukrainians kill him. It looks like, to me, that's just my opinion.
Yep.
And it's a travesty, and it only makes me worry more for Julian Assange and what's going to happen to Julian when he ends up in a U.S. prison. I must say, he's made it almost 5 years over there, and as hellish a place as Belmarsh is, they're being careful with him. They sure don't want Assange to die in their prison on their watch, because they know what the whole world will say, exactly what we're saying right now about Gonzalo Lira. So, rest in peace, Gonzalo. That's very sad news, though.
Yeah.
I wished him no harm. Not at all. I wanted him to be free. I wanted him to come home.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.